I lied to you in the last video. You are going to have two parts to the migration unit just to make sure that we can break away and fully understand the elements that cause migration. So this is part 2. So your key heading, you could put migration part 2. The central question is exactly the same. It's why and how do people migrate, do humans migrate. Main thing that we need to look at with this is there's two key factors. There's push factors and there's pull factors. Always, always, always associate bad things with push factors. These are things that are driving someone away from a place. It could be natural disasters, could be natural hazards, could be war, violence, no jobs. Those are bad things that make people frown and that drive people away from a place. On the flip side of that, the things that pull people to a place are always good things. Better jobs, more money, maybe a school system that's smaller. You want a smaller school system. Those are the things that might pull you to a place and make you happy, make you smile. Most people are migrating because of money. That's important to keep in mind. If it's outside of money, it's probably having to do something with forced migration. First heading we're going to look at is political push factors. So these are bad things dealing with the government. One thing that falls right into political push factors are slavery. When a government comes all over and enslaves a certain race, that could make you want to move away from a place. That could be a government decision that pushes you away from a place. I know I don't want to be enslaved. These are examples of forced migration. These are when you're actually forced away from a place. For example, when Iraq moved into Syria, the Syrian people were forced to move out of the place if they did not want to be executed, which most of them then moved away from a place. Now, there's three key terms that fit within forced migration. The first is refugee. These are talking about people who are being pushed away from a place. Sad. They're being pushed away from a place because of war, violence, because of persecution, because of being taken advantage of. And these are people that actually moved and are out of their country because of something bad that's going on that pushed them away. Currently, in 2010, the statistics said that there were 10.6 million refugees within the world. That's a lot of people. Internally displaced person is someone that may be a refugee at one point, but they are still within that country. They have not crossed international borders. They are just pushed away from their homes, but they're still within the borders of their country. They're just internally displaced. They're moved within that country itself and internally displaced. As of 2010, there were 14.7 million people who were internally displaced. The next is asylum seeker. Asylum seeker is a term that we need to differentiate from refugee. An asylum seeker is somebody that leaves a country and hopes to gain status of a refugee and to be recognized as a refugee whenever they go to that country, but they are not there yet. As of 2010, there were 838,000 asylum seekers. The biggest portion to date of forced migration so far is within Afghanistan and Iraq. Those wars that forced people away from a place. This created the most refugees and the most internally displaced people. All right, the next section we're looking at is political pull. Good things about the government that would drive people there. One is the government systems of democracy and capitalism. People could be seeking freedom, could be seeking the liberty to go out and take whatever job they want and to not be pushed around by the government. This could create better jobs. Maybe you want to work for this type of government. But a political pull factor, the best example is democracy and capitalism because it pulls people to those places because of the government. Another type of pull factor that we're going to look at is environmental pull factors. Good things that the environment does that makes people want to go to a place. Technology now allows people to move to places that are pretty, but that you might be isolated. In other words, you can move to places like to remote isolated islands that are beautiful, that you might not normally live there, but now you can live there, and because of technology, you're no longer isolated. You can still live there peacefully and happily and have the things that you want because of technology. Communication can allow for that. Some things is now you can live in portions of the Rocky Mountains. If you like the clean, fresh air, you can live there and still get food in those areas and still go to a grocery store and buy food. Retirees in the United States migrate to Florida because it's warm and they want to live out their days on the beachy areas of Florida. Also in Europe, around the Mediterranean Ocean, this warm type of climate, you have a lot of the graying area of the population. They're living in that area because it's warmer. An environmental push factor, a factor that makes people want to leave a place because of the environment, most of that revolves around water. either having too much water in an area or not enough water in an area. For example, if you're living in a floodplain, an area that sometimes floods, people might move because of this, because you can't live in an area that's covered in water. So that might be one reason why people want to migrate. Another reason is around the area of the Sahara Desert, above and below the Sahara Desert, there's what's called the Sahel. This is the area that's not quite desert, but it's not quite normal climate. It's kind of the in-between area. What's happening to the Sahel is actually moving because the Sahara is actually growing. So the Sahel is becoming more and more dry, and people are having to migrate because of this, because they're not getting enough water. The Sahel has basically ceased to sustain life, and people who used to live the nomadic lifestyle and follow herds around in this grassland area are now having to move to cities to find food, and that's putting a strain on the government. So an environmental push factor most of the time revolves around water, lack thereof, or either too much. An economical pull factor could be better jobs. Makes people happy. They go there for the jobs. United States and Canada are examples of economic pull factors because they're pulling people mostly from Latin America and Asia to these areas for the higher up jobs. There's jobs everywhere in the world. Most of the lower end jobs can be found here, like the factory type jobs, low skilled jobs. And so they come here for the higher up jobs. Economic push factors, the best way of saying that is this is places without money. Okay, this could be communist or command type of economies where the government is controlling everything and the people want to get out of that. But more importantly, this is areas that don't have a lot of money, don't have the high paying jobs that people are looking for. So that drives them away from a place. Bad things. Now, the last main thing that we're looking at is the consequences from migration. One of these consequences are socioeconomic consequences. A government or a country where a lot of people are moving away, there's less money in the economy because the people who would be working and taking money are now gone somewhere else. A key term that changes, well, we'll get there in just a second, but this is talking about people who have immigrated, who have left a country. It can hurt the economy of the country that they immigrated from because they're no longer working there. That's less people who are working. And especially when this happens, when your higher end type of workers, your high skilled workers and more educated workers are leaving that country, that could be a consequence of migration. Now, one thing that kind of helps out with this is what's known as remittances. A lot of times these immigrants leave, but their family doesn't go with them, and so they send money back to this place where their family is. So that's money that's coming back. A consequence of remittance is now where that country is going, so let's say they move to the United States, they're taking money that they made for the United States and shipping it or pushing it back to their home country, so the money is not staying in the United States. So that hurts the government, or that hurts the economy of the United States. Guest workers. This is an idea mainly in Europe where people are close to each other, but guest workers are people that can move from country to country and work in an area for a short period of time, but they then have to go back to their original country. So this could provide money for an economy that doesn't have it as they are working and coming back, but it could also hurt the economy of the country that they're working in because it's the same thing as remittance. They're working and taking money, but then they're bringing it back to their home country and pulling it out of the country that they gained that money from. Another consequence of migration is cultural consequences. One is cultural convergence. When cultures come together, most of the times they blend and they change. What you can have from this blending of cultures, you can have a loss of culture. When a dominant culture like the American culture comes into conflict with another one, maybe like a sub-Saharan African tribal culture, a lot of times what you have is that American culture starts to dominate it and you lose that normal conflict, or you lose that culture that was already there. The big thing that happens from cultural contact is conflict. A lot of times you have misunderstandings, you have prejudice, you have resentment that happens as these cultures are into contact with each other more than ever. A good example is like in New York where you have all of the different little cities within New York where these people groups are living next to each other. You're going to have conflict. Other consequences are environmental and political consequences. The environmental consequences of migration is the resource demand. You're now pulling resources out more than ever out of the ground, and a country is now having to sustain more people. A government then has to come in and control the borders somehow. That's what's going on in the United States right now. And the government also has to provide a living for those immigrants, which can also hurt the economy. Last slide, there's two more different consequences of migration that I want to look at. One is immigration policies. Most countries don't take immigrants if they're there just for money. They allow some guest workers, they allow people to come in for a little bit and work, but then they push them out. However, you do have unauthorized migration. In the United States, 58% of the unauthorized migration comes from immigrants from Mexico. Another one is the remittances, like we talked about earlier. Remittances can be a loss of money for the economy where you're actually working in, because you're then sending that money somewhere else. Main point is, migration is not always a good thing. It may be good for that people that are moving, but for the government or for the people around them, sometimes it's not always a good thing.